A man is found dead in his home with a broken clock on the floor beside him. The police arrive and after searching the house come to the conclusion that this was a robbery gone wrong. The only thing that doesn't make sense to them is why the clock was broken. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing else was stolen other than the fact that the drawers in the bedroom seemed to have been emptied. But what does the broken clock mean? Was it just an accident? The police interview the victim's friends and family, but they all seem to have alibis for the time of the murder, and none of them had any idea who would want to rob the old man. He wasn't rich or famous. He was simply a retired school teacher. Days pass, and the case goes cold until one of the detectives takes another look at the evidence. Pulling the victim's photo from his pocket, he notices something strange. If you look closely, you can see there are faint numbers written on the back of the photograph. He brings this to the rest of the team, and after examining the photo under a UV light, they can now clearly see the numbers 1234. Now the team remembers that when they entered the crime scene, they saw the clock on the floor directly beside the body, and it read 12:34. But how could this be? Either the killer had turned the clock's hands backwards or forwards to match the photo, or the photo had been taken at 12:34, and the killer had set the clock to that time afterwards. But then one of the forensics experts comes in and says, "Guys, I found something." They all rush over to see what he's found. It was a tiny piece of metal from the clock's pendulum. He had found the piece on the victim's shirt, and when they examined it closely, they realized it wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a small gear. It seems like the murderer must have dropped this while fleeing the scene. Now, do you know what time a clock with a broken pendulum will eventually stop working at? That's right, 12:34. So the clock stopped at 12:34 because its pendulum was broken. But if that's true, then was the clock trying to tell them the time of death? So the police put out a request to the media asking if anyone had seen a man matching the victim's description wearing a jacket with a pocket big enough to fit a clock. After showing the public the photo of the clock and the piece of metal, a woman came forward and said she had seen a man matching the victim's description walking into a clothing donation center around the time of the murder, carrying what looked like a grandfather clock. When the police searched the donation center, they found the clock in question and several others that had been donated. Looking closely at the clock, they saw that the pendulum was broken. As they continued their investigation, they noticed that the gears in the clock were also very worn down. This meant that even if the pendulum was fixed, the clock wouldn't last much longer. But this led the police to an important realization. Clocks were not the old man's hobby. In fact, he never even wound up the clocks he had collected. He just liked looking at them. What this means is that whoever broke the clock didn't break it very well. A skilled clockmaker could easily dismantle this clock and fix the pendulum without breaking anything else. But whoever did this was not a clockmaker. They were just some guy who had tried to steal a few things from the old man's house. And if that's the case, then why did he break the clock in the first place? Well, the police think that as he was rummaging through the house, he came across the old man's collection of clocks and, being a child at heart, couldn't resist winding them up and seeing what would happen. When he wound up the clock, the loose pendulum knocked over another object, making a loud noise. This startled him, causing him to drop the clock and break the pendulum. After realizing that the clock was broken, he panicked and ran away, leaving the clock behind. Later, when the old man was found dead, the police assumed that he had died of a heart attack, since there were no signs of struggle. They never suspected that someone would come back and kill the old man after seeing him dead. However, it's possible that this was the case, and the killer simply tried to cover his tracks by setting the clock for 12:34. So what happened to the robber? The police still haven't caught him. If you have any information, please contact your local authorities.